Yo, welcome to Match Cards YouTube. So today we're going to be using trainerhill.com in order to look at the win rates for certain decks in certain matchups. So if you haven't checked out Trainer Hill, you definitely should. It is a great resource, formerly known as Dino Data. I have featured their stuff on this video or on this channel before, so be sure to check them out. And some of you might be looking at this data and kind of automatically know what you're looking at, but I'm going to go through it anyway, give my opinions. And if you don't know what you're looking at, we're going to give you the tools so you can look at these numbers on this chart and kind of see, okay, what is favored, what isn't favored. As always, your testing does matter a bit. Some of you are going to say, no, I've beaten this deck all the time. You kind of have to ask yourself, how often have you played it? Who have you played against? Because sometimes in the online tournaments, they're not piloted by the most skilled players. But on the flip side, we sometimes have to acknowledge ourselves, I don't play this deck optimally. For example, I know that I do not play Mewtwo Rillaboom very optimally right now. So my testing matters for me. I know how I do against it, but I also know I can do better. And so this data comes really important for, do I want to keep testing and improving my play with a deck like Mewtwo Rillaboom or not? So anyway, let's look at what these numbers mean and some of the decks. So these are the current top 10 archetypes in terms of play. What trainerhill.com does is they take the data from the Play Limitless website, that's where all of the tournaments are held, and they save it. They put it in here. And so this is from the past about month, double check that, 5/1 to 5/31. Yep. So from about the last month of Play.Limitless tournament. As you can see, Blacephalon, Reshizard, also known as Tempozard, that's what I've been referring to it as in our videos, has favorable matchups against Mad Party. It wins about 63% of the time. Against Mewtwo Rillaboom, 62%. Victini, 65%. Luke Metal, 65% as well. And it takes unfavored versus Eternatus. Versus Pikarom, slightly unfavored. Unfavored against ADPZ. And a slightly favored against Mewtwo and Mew. That is, of course, people have been calling it Jit2. Sure, it is the Psychic Mewtwo and Mew that uses Jirachi GX in order to use Star Search, use Trevnor, use Poltergeist. You know, it's got a bunch of different attacks. So we can kind of look at, okay, what do I think a meta is going to look like now? The online meta has been changing pretty consistently. Suddenly, Eternatus, a couple of weeks ago, Eternatus was like the top deck. Everyone was playing Eternatus all over the place. And now Eternatus is being played less. So when you're using this, you kind of think about, what do I actually think I'm going to play against? For example, as of the time of recording this video, Pikarom has been really popular. We've seen so much peak. Understandably, I love Pikarom. So if we want to beat Pikarom, we can take a look and get an idea. Pikarom has a slightly favored Tempozard, a favored Mewtwo and Mew. Of course, you got the hammers, really body that matchup usually. Slightly favored Mewtwo Rillaboom, 50-50 mirror. Of course, that should always be 50-50. Very favored Victini and a slightly favored ADPZ. So we know if there's going to be much Pikarom, maybe I don't want to play one of those decks. Now, of course, with that said, some of you might be sitting there saying, in my testing, as ADP, I can beat Pikarom consistently. That's not unheard of. 53.8 does mean Peak is slightly favored. I'm on Team Peak is favored in that matchup for sure, but I don't doubt that ADP can win the matchup. I've lost to ADPs playing Pikarom, of course. Sometimes ADP does ADP stuff. So somebody have to ask yourself, what is the matchup like? That is a very hammer-reliant matchup. If you as an ADP player know how to play around hammers, how to use your energy switches effectively, how to safely, conserve resources, use them at the right time, how to conserve your switches so you can't get tandem shocked out of the game early, then maybe it's slightly favored for you. Other matchups like Victini. Look, there's different Victini builds. Maybe play the Mewtwo with the low puff and you're like, I know for sure it's good. But in 62% favored, that's pretty darn high. That's one where I really find it hard to believe your Victini list has a favored Pikarom matchup. You kind of have to ask yourself, is it actually your data? Is your testing actually that good or not? And then we say, okay, we're going to play a tournament. We think Pikarom is going to be the most popular deck. We probably don't want to play Victini because we think we're going to hit a lot of Pikarom. But also, it's important to note, if we think Pikarom is the most popular deck and it beats Victini, we don't want to play Victini, but also, we don't have to worry too much about Victini. Mad Party, Eternatus have good Pikarom matchups as well. I don't want to ignore that. Some of the other ones that we can look at real quick that are relevant in here. So ADPZ being the one that always played. ADPZ is a very favored Mad Party matchup and generally close to 50-50 for everything. Peak is, like I said, it's about 3.8% on the peak side, close-ish. But the Eternatus matchup is very unfavored. If you're the type of person who says, I want to beat ADPZ no matter what, play Eternatus. Eternatus against ADPZ wins 58% of the time. I would agree with that completely. There's not much ADP can do to really swing that matchup. Even a big charm is just annoying for Eternatus, not actually a way to like auto win the matchup or swing it too much in their favor. So if you're just like, I hate ADP, I think there's going to be a lot of ADP, take a look, say, let's play some Eternatus. Now, I do want to point out too, Eternatus has a ridiculous matchup spread. On paper, Eternatus looks like the best deck. I'm not going to go through all 10 of these individually. You can go through all 10 individually if you want. You'll probably come to the same conclusion unless you value numbers slightly differently than me. Good Tempo Zard. Of course, Marnie and Plants are very good against that. Good Mad Party, good Mewtwo and Mew, good all Mewtwo and Mew decks, all tag team decks, really. The only thing it struggles against is it does struggle against Victini, of course, because they can get the turn 2 KO on you if you go second. If you go first, you got a chance, but then you're letting a Welder deck go second, which is always potentially a little scary. And of course, the Rapid Strike Urshifu matchup is bad, and the Luke Metal matchup is bad. But if you play like a Phoebe and a Palpad, I think this number can go up. Not favored. I don't think it can go that high up, but Phoebe Palpad, double Phoebe, Phoebe and Sableye, something like that. I think this matchup can become a bit better. Eternatus has a ridiculous matchup spread. Of course, I'm not a huge fan of Eternatus because you essentially just click Dread End over and over and over again. Not my type of deck, but it's one that you really have to consider if you're like, what has the best matchup spread right now in the meta? EDP probably. Also Eternatus probably. They just kind of beat most of the things. Some other decks that are quite interesting to look at is Lucario and Melmetal. We've seen it fall off quite a bit because with the release of the Galarian Rapidash, Victini has become way more popular. It makes sense. I've been enjoying messing around with the Rapidash too. Rapidash fits great in a Welder deck. So the Welder decks have been coming out to play. Luke Metal does not like Welder decks. 23% win rate against Victini, 35% against Tempo Zard. Sure, I'm sure some of you that are Luke Metal players are going to tell me, no, those are favored matchups. Sure, whatever. That's fine. Think that all you want. It's not a good matchup. It is very sketchy. I have definitely beaten fire decks with Luke Metal before, and I'm not the best Luke Metal player in the world, but you have to have all the answers at the right time. It does not feel like a good game. With that said, almost everything else is good for Luke Metal. If you avoid fire, and depending on the ADP list you're playing against, you just have a bunch of favored matchups. So another one that's quite interesting, you take a couple almost hard auto losses, not actual auto losses, but about as close to an auto loss as you're going to get in the current format. And then you take a bunch of pretty darn favorable matchups. Those are a couple decks that I really want to point out. Eternatus, I think, has the best overall matchup spread. Luke Metal, very close second. The one issue is, when are those Welder decks going to go down? Now, of course, you might be saying, well, we're seeing more peak. More peak means the Welder decks probably do a little worse. Pikarom taking favored matchups to both Tempo Zard and Victini. And that might mean Luke Metal's pretty good. I do want to point out, we had a video with Mike Fouché on the Luke Metal Pikarom matchup. You should go ahead and check that out if you haven't, because the matchup, if played correctly by Pikarom, is not quite like this. Most Pikarom players do go too aggressive and do end up throwing the game. I will not deny that at all. I've beaten plenty of Pikarom as Luke Metal. But the matchup is winnable if the Pikarom player does the right stuff. But with that said, it looks like Luke Metal's quite good. It looks like Eternatus is quite good. And you've got other stuff that's interesting. Mewtwo Rillaboom is another one that I think is one where I would trust your own testing more than the data. It's a difficult deck to play. Every other deck on this thing is either you hit your Welders or you just vomit with the Denes and research every turn and hit your cards. Mewtwo Rillaboom is a very slow, methodical deck. I think it's difficult to play. And because of that, I think these numbers might skew in the losing direction more than they should. So for example, we have Mad Party, 48%. You've got your Wondrous Labyrinth. That's pretty good. You have Wondrous Labyrinth, you have a lot of HP. If you can Malolana on turn 1, that's pretty good. They hit you for a little bit. You go, all right, cool, Big Charm, Malolana, throw down a Wonder Lab, Calming Hurricane. There's not much that they can really do. So some of these matchups for some of these decks, like I said, you should trust your own testing a little bit, but this gives us a nice little guide. So again, how to use the site. These numbers represent the deck on the left, how often it wins against the deck up top, and you should use these numbers sparingly. They're valuable. They're very valuable. They do give you a good idea of what wins against what, but at a certain point, you also have to test yourself or trust yourself just a little bit and say, you know, this says that this is a slightly favored matchup for Mewtwo Rillaboom. I'm pretty sure in theory and in practice, or sorry, it's favored for Mad Party, but in theory and practice, I think it's favored for Mewtwo Rillaboom, and trust yourself on that one. If you're the type of person who's like, oh, Luke, sure, Victini and Luke Metal, you're like, no. Luke Metal bodies it. That matchup's a 50-50. Sure, I'm going to let you think that. I'm not going to agree with you ever, though. I don't think that's a good matchup whatsoever. Of course, it depends what Victini's playing, all that good stuff. You know, are they playing the Giratina or not? Are they playing Hand Disruption? Or are they playing, you know, whatever they're playing? So this is a good little site. Like I said, I featured it before on here. I want to go over not just the site and how to use it, but also my main thoughts on the meta right now. Stuff that got the best matchup spreads. Stuff that I'm really strongly considering is like, oh, these are good decks. E-Turn, Luke Metal being up there. ADPZ is always up there. If you've watched this channel, you know I love Peak. We have a ton of videos on how to play Peak ROM optimally, ton of VOD reviews, interviews, stuff like that. I love Peak. Probably what I'm going to play for PC4, although I'm trying to find other stuff as well. So anyway, let me know what you think down below. I'll have this linked in the description, of course. Remember, like, comment, subscribe, all the other YouTube stuff, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Peace out.